Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And today we've seen The Boy and the Heron, possibly the last film to be directed by Hayao Miyazaki, Japan's great animator, one of the founders of Studio Ghibli. He apparently said 10 years ago he was going to retire after The Wind Rises, but he's obviously not done, and this has been some 7 years in the making. I know that his producer, with whom he co-founded the studio, Suzuki, has said he doesn't believe this will be his last film. You know, I think they said, like, he's still around the studio, he still maintains a date, like, he just thinks this guy's never gonna, until he dies, he's gonna keep working, you know.
Well, good for us.
We saw The Red Turtle together on the podcast, quite early on in the podcast, which was co-produced with Studio Ghibli, and it was the same style of animation and illustration, but it was directed by a Dutch director, I think. I don't think I've ever seen a Miyazaki film.
Oh, haven't you?
I think this is my first. So we saw this.
Oh, God, I've seen them all.
We saw this at Cineworld. It was very, very full. It's like half full screening. I've not seen a cinema that full probably since Barbenheimer. Yeah. You know, like there was people came out for this. It was offered both in subtitled and dubbed versions, and we saw the dubbed one, which has got an all-star cast of Anglosphere actors.
Yes, Florence Pugh, Robert Pattinson, Willem Dafoe, Christian Bale, etc.
Yeah, some of whom I recognised immediately. So, I mean, Robert Pattinson as the Heron, I didn't recognise. In fact, I thought that was Willem Dafoe. He's putting on such a different voice. Mark Hamill, I knew it was Mark Hamill. I just couldn't. I knew it, and then it's only when he came from the credits I went, "Oh yes, of course it is." Christian Bale, I thought was Idris Elba. Weirdly. And it's great. I mean, it was great to see it in the dubbed version because, you know, it's anime, so there's not lip syncing involved. You don't need. You'd rather be looking at the images and the subtitles. And that's what this allows you to do.
Well, and also you want to be able to get what voice actors bring.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also I suppose as critics to be able to evaluate what those actors do bring. So I mean, yeah, there's no reason to see it in an original version if it's an animated film.
Yeah. And so this story is, I'd say there's some Alice in Wonderland in it, there's some Wizard of Oz in it.
Sleeping Beauty.
Yeah. It's about this boy in 1942-43 Japan, so it's wartime Japan. He loses his mother.
In a fire.
Yeah, in a fire that claims a hospital where she works. A year after that, that's 3 years into the war, he says, and then a year after that, his father evacuates the two of them to the countryside, where he also marries the mother's sister. The boy is, you know, he's isolated. He needs a mother figure. He's upset about the loss of his mother and so on. And he's lured by a talking grey heron to go into this tower where he says, "Your mother's still alive." And what transpires is a journey into another world where characters come back in different forms, time has moved slightly differently, and all manner of weird and wonderful things happen. This is why I say there's a Wizard of Oz connection, because in the Wizard of Oz you have everyone in the real world represented in the other world in some way. You know, you know, and you were there, and you were there, and you were there, and that's an element of what's going on here. That's vaguely spoiler free, but we'll get into obviously spoiler territory. I didn't get on with this film very much. You know, people have been talking about it as a culmination of Miyazaki's career, his work, and I thought this isn't the film that makes me want to see his other work. You know?
Oh, how interesting!
I thought there's incredibly beautiful animation and illustration in it. There are some marvelous images, but I didn't get on with the story. It felt, you know, things are just being made up as they go along. But I was also thinking, like, every objection, in some sense, that I had to this film, you could probably level at, say, Alice in Wonderland, which is a story that I grew up loving and reading. So maybe it's just not my cup of tea, you know?
I don't know. I feel a little bit... I mean, I can understand where you're coming from, because I think his other films, Il Porco Rosso and Kiki's Delivery Service and so on, they're just so magical and fun, and like you're with them all the time and so on. And this is, I think this is a masterwork by an old master. So, you know, so I think it requires more of the audience, and it's less fun in quotation marks. So I think there are moments, that kind of drag. Well, drag. Well,
I would say drag.
Okay, there are moments where I felt a bit dislocated, let's say, right?
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, I thought from the very beginning, my God, like it's every frame of painting is so beautiful, to look at, and it moves so incredibly well. And then I also thought, here is an animated film that is doing what live action cinema has forgotten to do, or no longer does very well, which is, to make a film about people and families and generations and loss and coming of age and kind of this movement of the conscious and the unconscious, which sometimes seems magical to children and which kind of sometimes feels like entering other worlds, right? Like, so it's a coming of age story where the coming of age is interior and internalized, right? And I thought it was magical. I thought, this is, my God, this is what, like I really felt that. Like, those moments where I was just like kind of awestruck saying, this is what cinema is, right? Like, so
I mean, it's unconstrained by a lot of kind of conventional logic. Although I'm sure everything, when you look at it, will have its place and its reason. But it moves once you get into that other world, which takes a while to get there, I would say. But once you do get there, things start moving quite quickly and quite freely, and you get those little marshmallow looking fellas. Like, there's no real explanation given for them, where they come from, why they're just there, and they do this magical thing, and they look marvelous, and something else then happens, and something else then happens, and I can totally see kids being kind of spirited away, haha, by that.
Well, but that also then ties, to the idea that kind of children are brought by storks, because actually those beings, are children entering another world,
That's what
right?
we're told, yeah.
Yeah, and kind of, and then kind of, though in this case the storks eat them, don't they? Or the pelicans eat them.
Yeah.
So it connects with other things. But I think what I liked most about the beginning, like with all great children's films, really, is that it's brought forth in terror and horror, right? I mean, this image, can you imagine this image of a kid's mother being burned alive while she holds out his hand to him? Yeah, and so the child's image is the mother asking to be rescued by him, calling out his name, right? I mean, my God, like you would never dare do that in a live action film. I mean, kind of a young woman burning in flames, yelling out to her child to save her. I mean, that's like,
well, not in a film that is family friendly, aimed at children. It might be different if in a more adult film, but this is
you might get it in a horror film, or
exactly,
in a kind of an origin story for some witch saga or something.
Yeah, exactly.
But
this is a film that's aimed at children. The audience was full of young kids. Parents had brought their kids, and you wouldn't see it in Disney, right?
And I mean, in the first 5 minutes of the film, I think it's such rich storytelling, really, because it's all from the child's point of view, but you get such complexity. So it's a child who's lost his mother, who is dislocated from his home, moving to a countryside which he's completely unfamiliar with, to a house that seems full of old ladies like witches and that is terrorizing, kind of to a new person, who he's never met before, but who his father is already married to, and who he's told he's got a stepbrother on the way. I mean, yeah, and who is so ill at ease and discomforted and alone and bereft and so on, that he actually hurts himself with a rock so he doesn't have to go to school. Yeah, he breaks his head open with a rock. I mean, that's kind of incredible stuff, right? And you get all these sense of relationships, yeah? The relationship to place, the relationship to mother and stepmother, the changing relationship to the father, yeah, kind of, the new school, the countryside versus the city. I mean, there's so many kind of things operating kind of, in those first 5 minutes or 10 minutes of the story, much less everything else. I thought it was incredible.
I thought it was very slow and boring. I did. I mean, every sort of everything I didn't get on with in this film, I will put down to an issue of taste, an issue of it not really being aimed at me necessarily. So like, I don't consider it a kind of critical of the film. It just wasn't matching me today, or I wasn't matching it, and I did find it a bit patience testing at points. I kind of thought this is like prog rock, You know, like it takes a very long time. It makes no sense whatsoever. Occasionally, it has kind of really wonderful moments. But there are people who think that this is the best thing ever, the only thing worth watching. And I just think, no, this is not. Like there's, I'm not feeling it. I'm not guessing it.
Oh, I thought it was great. Yeah, I
Yeah.
did, and on different levels. Yeah, I thought the storytelling itself, narratively, it was gobsmacking, right? Because you have this tale that travels through worlds, right? And that travels through like states of consciousness. It's a world in which a pelican can be a person, in which kind of magic occurs, in which you are in touch with your ancestors, but also in which you are part of multiple worlds. Actually, the whole beginning made me think, when I was a child and I'd walk in like Jean Mon's park or something, and you think, oh my God, I better not step on that flower because there's probably like 50 million worlds in that flower that are like us in the universe, right? Like that that old story about like kind of, there's a universe contained maybe in that flower, that way we are maybe part of a longer universe. And, maybe our sense of time is elastic, but really maybe what we experience as a lifetime to a person outside the world stepping on us is just a second. Anyway, the film brings out that kind of sense of wonder and what is time and what is space, and the possibility of there being kind of different worlds and so on, taking place around different timelines and so on, which is what happens, right? Well, later on when he meets his mother, right? Yeah.
As a younger woman.
As a younger woman. I thought that was just, and to me it was legible at each moment, right? So I thought that was like amazing to, a kind of a complexity of storytelling, really, that is nonetheless kind of rendered legibly. And then kind of there are other elements, like so, when that rooster king or parrot king is chasing after them, and you see the feathers in the background, really, and then he only kind of comes into being once they then move, and then you see his image chasing. I mean, I thought there were moments like that that were just, I mean, they're not grandstanding, thrilling or whatever, but actually they're very sophisticated and thrilling, yeah, to watch. So it's not like a big set piece, but it's a tiny element of storytelling that demonstrates how sophisticated it is.
Yeah, there's some great kind of subtlety to the visual design and the animation and framing and composition and that sort of thing that I really enjoy. I like how much bird shit everywhere. I mean, I think it's quite funny. I think it's quite deliberately. I think it's meant, like, you got this story which could be kind of quite highfalutin, and the son who has lost his mother, the mother's being replaced, and he's isolated, and all this kind of stuff, and all the stresses and pressures on this kid, and then he gets lost in this whole other world. And he's got these birds who are kind of preying on him. You've got the heron, the pelicans, the parakeets. They're all in some way threatening to him, but at the same time, they're always leaving bird shit around the place, and it's like it brings it down a level and makes it sort of quite earthy and funny. I think that's a nice touch. I enjoyed that because also no one like point. Actually, the one time someone notices it is the dad when the birds fly out of the portal or whatever, and they shit all over the dad, and he seems to notice that there's bird shit, and there's a close up of going on his shoe, because there's a thing about the dad has he thinks a lot of himself, and I think the way he looks is important. He runs this factory and he's producing munitions for the war effort, and he status is kind of important to him, right? Like the thing about when the kid attacks himself with the rock and hurts himself, he says, "Oh, I just fell." And the dad's going, "No, you tell me who did this so we can get revenge."
Yes.
It's like that's important to him, right? This kind of status and imagery and
that he's a powerful man.
Yeah, and so it's kind of important, I guess, that you see him in particular have bird shit on his foot.
I thought that was also kind of, in some sense, significant, because he's not just a factory owner, right? He's somebody who is making munitions, who is making what seem to be fighter planes, right? Because you have the shells.
You see all the canopies.
Yeah, which is kind of, I think, significant in wartime Japan, right? They could have made him, I mean, the owner of a factory that made tinned goods or something, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Although, as I understand it, this also partially, the film is partially autobiographical, and I think he's based fairly closely on Miyazaki's actual dad, and I think that was so. Which is not to say that's like you then can't talk about it. But I think that's one of the reasons that
Mm.
he is.
Yes, but you can read a lot of things into it from the time
Mm,
in which it's said, because at the end of the film, for example, when, all the parakeets kind of, are escaping their crumbling world, which I think in some sense is meant to be a kind of a metaphor for, Japan in its last throes during the war. You see all the parakeets kind of as refugees with their bundles and packages and,
mm,
yeah, kind of trying to escape that world. So, kind of the imagery is fantastical. It's a world of, you know, parakeets that eat people and that are always hungry, right? And that are always looking for something to eat.
mm.
Uh, but then it's kind of this place with, what is very much a kind of an imagery of World War II kind of displacements,
Mm.
and refugees. I mean, it's
I also saw that kind of more generally the stuff about the tower maintaining this world by keeping this tower of blocks upright and having to change its shape and keep it in harmony and that sort of thing, as a kind of as a much more general thing about the maintenance of our world and the importance of looking after it and the responsibility of doing so. And there's also a thing about responsibility to the generations in there, because it's this great granduncle figure who
mm,
is kind of trying to pass this job on to the kid, and this question of finding harmony in and the importance of creativity, I guess, in that. And
I just going to say I loved because what they're looking for is prosperity, beauty, and balance.
mm,
Uh, so abundance, balance.
they talk about harmony, but I don't know if you're referring to a particular line.
Was it's when the grand uncle has all those 13 pieces together,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and that they all have to like not fall in order for the world to continue,
Mm-hmm.
and he's trying to pass it on, and he says that he's finally found stones that don't have malice in them,
Yeah.
right? So that he could create a world of balance. He might have used the word harmony, but I heard balance,
Mm-hmm.
beauty, and abundance.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, instead of whatever it is that the grand uncle had created, which is this world of malice.
Yeah.
I mean, it is all, and again, I think you can look at this film as something so pertinent to our time because, the film is really dealing with World War II and all the destruction that was brought out of it. And then, what world comes out of that one? And obviously, the world that came out of that one is our world,
Mm.
right? Kind of, which is on the verge of destruction and which kind of, the battle with the environment seems to have been lost, and in which kind of arguably amongst the worst victims of World War II are now perpetrating, a terrible crime on another people. So, the film brings out all those questions, I think.
Mm.
And actually, the other thing that I thought was so interesting, so a friend of ours, wrote this blog about, how his roommate died last year and how since his roommate died, that, he seems to be seeing grief everywhere in cinema,
Mm.
and of course, kind of I can understand why he now sees things that way. But of course, kind of cinema is at least as much about loss, which is also to say grief,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, as it is about love or anything else, right? Like, kind of, you think almost every film begins with something lost at the beginning, yeah, or an equilibrium that is kind of
Disturbed.
disturbed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that usually involves a sense of loss, right? So, kind of, this is the case with this film,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that it kind of, it is about loss and grief and overcoming grief. At least the whole, well, three-quarters of the film is about his grief for the loss of his mother and
Mm-hmm.
how he's not willing to replace her, and not willing to accept a stepmother or, a new situation. Yeah, and I think, the film captures that sense of loss, grief, acceptance, but all through a child's imaginings. Yeah, it is happening to a child,
Mm.
and a child that has an imagination, but of course, the film makes his imagination so vivid that it's the real world. It becomes just an alternate universe. Kind of. So, whereas in a live action film, you might have someone say, "Oh, snap out of it," right? Like it's just a child's imagination, or he's living in a world of his own with an imaginary friend or something, right? Like here, kind of, animation could give like full reign to the development of that and all, kind of in aspects that are really quite surreal, and again, I think kind of become kind of landmark, really, or unique, or because I think Miyazaki gives full reign to this imagination, which is very surreal. I mean, talking herons, seas that are alive, little amoebas that kind of are in fact children in another world, a world peopled by parrots and pirates and sleeping beauties, and that are your mother, and women that dissolve at your touch. I mean, all of that is really kind of quite surreal imagery.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all over the place.
Yeah. So anyway, I can see you're not engaging very much, but
no. I'm not trying to be a dick. It's just I don't know what I was expecting, but I think I was expecting something more. People, the reputation of Ghibli and Miyazaki are that his films are so moving. People constantly talk, and I didn't find anything to be moved by in this. It's not going to turn me off watching the others, but I just don't think it's the one that goes, oh yeah, I have to see the others now.
Well, I think his films are very moving. The depth comes from the way that people connect with them. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So,
and I actually also don't think that this is, to me, his most moving, and nor is it his most easily accessible, which almost all the others are. But I do think that this is really like a masterpiece of cinema, and very rich, and kind of operating on many levels, and worth, many other viewings, I think.
Yeah. Well, if you like this sort of thing, it'll be the sort of thing that you like. And if you are, more generous or in a better mood than me, you will have a really good time with it. It was worth seeing it on the big screen. It looked wonderful. I mean, some of that imagery at the start, the stuff, and it's the repeated imagery that comes back in the kids' nightmares of the mother in flames is astonishing to look at. It's incredibly animated. The way that the fire, distorts the line drawing behind it. It's amazing to look at. Some of it is really remarkable. I just spent a lot of the film going, okay, where is this going? How long is this going to take? And like, because kind of plot developments and one thing after another seemed to happen so frivolously and so at random, you kind of think, I don't know how long this is going to take to finish, because there could be 5 more hours of this, or it could end in 20 minutes. They could just decide on a whim to, you know what I mean? I had an issue with that. I just wasn't in the zone with the thing. But that's just me. Some people will really, really love this, and it is worth seeing it on a big screen. It's also, I think it's supposed to be Japan's most expensive animation ever. I think it's the first Miyazaki film and the first original anime to go to #1 at the box office in the US and Canada. It's breaking records, and it's getting a good reputation already. I'm the outlier here, so don't listen to me.
All right. Well, on that note, I highly recommend it. I think it's a very great film, and I do think it's, one can see it as the work of an ancient master about childhood, and that combination of those two things, someone who seems very wise and has a lot of experience and has lived a long life, but then is looking back at that moment of childhood. I think the combination of that is, to me, really magical, and certainly it's an incredibly gorgeous film to look at. So I highly recommend that people see it.
Yeah, good.
On that note, we are eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Audible, Google Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and YouTube. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter, and Blue Sky, eavesdropping.bsky.social, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you very much for listening.
Bye-bye.